but we are going to shift into a quick presentation that we've done the last few regional days around council manager relationships. And from my perspective as the regional council director and a former manager myself, we'd like, because we have a lot of elected officials in the room, we have some new elected officials in the room. We wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about that really important relationship between the council, the board, commission, whatever you call yourselves, and your chief executive, which is your manager. So I think it's really important, and we've done quite a few manager searches over the last year or two. The market for managers has really changed over the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. When I first got into this business 26 years ago, the market was really tight. There weren't nearly as many job openings. There were a lot of individuals that had been well tenured in a position. Finding those opportunities was particularly difficult. I get a publication every 2 weeks from the North Carolina City County Managers Association that lists the vacancies and the openings, and it is almost every 2 weeks that it now is 2 pages. There are many vacancies, many openings, not a lot of folks looking for jobs. And so the market is pretty wide open for managers. Managers can, I don't want to say pick and choose, but there are a lot of opportunities for managers to take a look at if they're doing it. I think one of the really important things that boards, when we talk to them about this position, is you're hiring a CEO. You're really hiring that chief executive very much like a private business. I mean, you're entrusting that individual, even by state statute, to be the day-to-day manager and leader of the organization. And so making sure that you and that manager understand those roles is really important for both sides as you enter those conversations. And also understanding the managers have to understand, and I had the same conversation with managers that are looking for opportunities, the change in landscape, how difficult it is, both for elected officials right now and for managers, because of the differences, the change in political landscape, the instability that all of us are dealing with, social media. I mean, thank you for being an elected official, right? It is tough. And the managers also had that same exposure, not in the same way, it's different, but they're really the target for a lot of things because of the position and the role that they play. So we want to make sure that everybody's understanding that everybody, elected officials, managers, are under a whole lot of pressure. And especially when you're going into the hiring process. Recognizing that, having those discussions about roles and expectations, really important. So how do you retain your manager? I mean, my hope as the regional council director, I mean, part of my role is to be a support for the managers in the region and for the boards. And my hope is that every manager is happy in their role, the boards are happy with their managers. And just a few pieces of advice from somebody who's been through it and somebody who's talked to managers for 25 years on, how do you retain your manager if you want to? And we realize that managers serve at the pleasure of the board, and that is a natural thing that sometimes the board decides they don't want to retain the manager. We get that. But if everything's working well, there's some tips and sort of things to think on how to make sure you're retaining your manager. Making sure you're focusing on those long-term issues and less on the day-to-day stuff. The day-to-day stuff is important, but that's why you hired the manager and why you expect that manager hire a talented staff. They're dealing with day-to-day. The board is there for long-term strategy, policy, thinking about the future of the community. That's where the manager needs you all, needs your connections, needs your expertise to help give that guidance. If you need training about the council manager form of government, if there's some difficulty or misunderstanding or new board members that don't quite understand, and that's a natural thing. I mean, you think about a new board member coming in, they've got a lot to learn. It's okay to ask for help. When we can provide assistance, the school of government can provide assistance, the league, the association, North Carolina is blessed with a lot of resources to provide training around those issues. Don't make promises that don't have the support of the governing body, right? So we say this a lot to boards that individual elected officials really are powerless in terms of direction without the support of the board, right? Your role as an elected official is supremely important, but the power comes with the board. And so making sure that the board is together and underscore at least the majority in decisions. So have an agreement with how direct staff contact works, and that's going to be different in every jurisdiction, right? It may be okay. Some managers may be like, you can contact whatever staff member you want and talk about. Some managers may prefer that come through them, but I think it's important to have that understanding so that it be surprised. Setting clear goals is really important. Making investments to impact your community positively, and recognizing and really honoring that manager's time is very valuable. So, they're the CEO, they're probably the highest paid staff member. So making sure that you're doing what you can to make sure that their time is being used wisely will help the manager feel like they're making a difference. So some of these are pretty much, understood, treating the manager and the staff with respect. Understanding that the storms many times not manager's fault, but that they're really the captain of the ship, right? Their ship, their experience, their work is going to have a large impact on dealing and getting through a crisis if that ever hits your community or your organization. Really being mindful of that work-life balance for a manager is important. And then recognizing that the public sector sometimes has to deal with things that the private sector doesn't deal with. They could be tragic events. They could be public expectations, living in that fishbowl, right? Being exposed to being on camera and having to make decisions or undergoing questions. Private sector CEOs sometimes don't have to deal with that. And so just understanding the differences between the public and the private is awfully important. So, addressing problems without high emotions, it's up to the board and the council to address behavior issues of individual elected officials. It's not the manager's job to do that. And that I see that a lot of times where a board or board member will go to the manager and say, I'm having issues with the council member X. Go deal with that, please, or be the go-between. That's the chief elected's job and the other council members. That's not the manager's job. You hire the manager to run the organization. So really being clear about expectations about how the manager interacts with the board. Some boards prefer that the manager interact with each board member. Some boards may prefer that the manager sort of directs to the chief elected. I'm not saying either one's good or bad. It's just based on the board's desires. So make sure you understand that with the manager. And if you have an election and have a change in board members, it's probably time to recheck on that. Don't just assume. So the manager may have a preference, or may say, well, I've seen it done this way, it works really well. I've seen a few managers in this region really have difficulty because they feel like, well, I'm talking to all the board members, but they only want me to talk to the mayor, or I talked to the mayor about this, and the board members will want to talk to us. So just being clear about that, I think it's really important for everybody involved. So I don't want this to be about, there are times when it is appropriate, and I think all of us in the local government management field, we understand that part of that is that there's going to be times when it's time to move on. And so if the board reaches that conclusion, just a few things to think about. The manager's a professional manager, understands that boards have to make really tough decisions. Your job is immensely hard. And they understand that their tenure is not permanent. There's a reason why they have an employment agreement. There's a reason why state statute says that they serve a pressure board. Managers understand that. So it's if you have to have that conversation, it may not be pleasant, but the manager gets it. They understand the profession. If you've tried to reconcile differences and haven't been successful, communicate that with the manager. Make sure that they understand what's happening so that they're not caught off guard. Just making sure everybody's communicating is important. And managers are professionals. They don't want to be terminated, but they understand that they may be. So just thinking about that and working with them. And then if you desire change, if you can give them time to maybe find another position, maybe that's the right path. Maybe it's not. But having those honest discussions, I think, will serve the parties well when it's time, perhaps, to make a change. So we work with a few local governments that have gone through several managers, and the pool, the managers know that. So if you have to fire somebody, that's understandable. But if you terminate somebody and then in a couple of years you terminate another one, and then in a couple of years you terminated another one, that's going to limit your pool. So you have to think about those pros and cons. The managers talk to each other. There's a network, right? just like the elected officials talk to each other, about how things go. So the manager network in the state is very strong, and so there are conversations that go on about where there are great places to work and where there's issues. And so just be aware of that. If you ever fire a manager, I think you also have to be prepared that you're probably going to have some other staff turnover, either staff that are leave because the manager left, or when you bring in that new manager, they're probably going to want to they may want to make some changes to staff. So just be prepared that that turnover may not be limited to just the manager. And then pay the severance agreement. Be really clear at the front end what severance looks like. Be really clear about when it may be paid and when it may not be paid. There's some local examples right now around that. Okay, so I think you just have to be really clear about severance, clear the employment agreement, making sure that everybody understands. So let's talk more positive stuff, okay? So let's say you're wanting to attract a new manager, you're excited about the opportunity, it's a great organization, a great community. What can you do to really stand out in a market that's pretty flooded right now? So, position that local government to be attractive, projecting not just projecting, but actually demonstrating politically stable community as much as possible is really important to a manager. Solid financial health, quality department heads and staff, avoiding family member hires is really important, and then understanding the role of the manager as the CEO. I've done some searches where in this region where we talk about like a car allowance for the manager, a pretty standard thing for a manager to get. And the board said, well, we'll do a car allowance, but the manager is going to have to document every single trip they make, where they went, how far it was. How's that demonstrating trust in your chief executive? And they were like, oh. And what they weren't trying to do anything wrong. It was just like, well, we require mileage. Well, this is a car allowance. It's different. Okay, so just having those honest discussions and really understanding the landscape and the impact on somebody that you're entrusting managing the entire organization to. So, well, selfish promotion. If you feel like, say in some jurisdictions you have an HR staff that can probably do a great job recruiting, but I do think it's worth a conversation with your board about how putting the HR staff in a position of helping recruit their boss, the chief executive, how that works. And so there are third parties out there. There are a lot of great firms that can help recruit. We do it. We usually do more small communities. There are a lot of great firms locally that work with a lot of jurisdictions here. So that gives you the opportunity for that objective third party to come in. And the other thing is you're working exclusively with the board, right? This is a board's decision. You may not need or want staff's input, and that's okay if that's how you want to run it. But if you want to do that, it kind of puts staff in a hard position. If you then want staff to vet candidates and see who's applying and all that stuff. I hate to say it, but what we see in pools now are smaller pools, less experienced candidates, just because we have a lot of managers that are retiring, a lot of managers who are staying where they are because it's stable. There are a lot of vacancies. So it's not necessarily if you get a small pool, it's not necessarily a reflection on your community. It's just there's not as many folks out there right now. So let me talk about confidentiality. And I know in some communities that can be a big thing to talk about. What I always tell boards is whatever you want to do around confidentiality, make sure you talk about it and you advertise it up front. If you want the search to be public in some way, like to have finalists come, that's your decision. You're probably going to limit your pool a little bit. But you need to at least say that when you advertise, so that candidates know, hey, my name's going to get out there at some point. I need to tell my board that I'm applying or tell somebody. Don't say this is going to be confidential and then at the end, oh, we want everybody to come for a public meeting. You're going to lose your candidates. So just as long as you're being upfront about what you want to do. When you're considering candidates, there's a lot of considerations around who may be best day one, but with the market where things are, thinking about, well, this person may need some support, but we're really looking for somebody that's stable and outstanding maybe after year 2 or 3. You're never going to find a perfect candidate. There's always going to be something that I can work on, that they can work on. If you find a profession, let me know. No, not far from it. But we know what we need to work on. And this is hard, I know it, but I really urge boards not to have a split vote when they hire their manager. If worse comes to worse, that the disagreement is over the employment agreement, then split the vote. Vote unanimously on the person and have a split vote on the contract. Because think about if you're the CEO coming into an organization that you have to manage, and you have individuals that may be trying to challenge your authority or anything like that, and you're coming in on a 3-2 vote, it is really tough to manage. Now, there may be a time that happens, and I get that. But if everybody's like, yeah, we can live with this person, then give them a unanimous vote. You can always hold them accountable and then terminate them later. But unanimity speaks volumes to the organization that we're behind this person to lead. So I would say that's one of my biggest things with boards. So if you appreciate your manager, tell them. It's okay. I appreciate the elected officials. We all have hard jobs, and people like to hear that they're doing a good job. So tell them that you appreciate what they're doing. But also let them know there's something that you think that they work on.
We would say it in public.
Hey, I think some managers pay privately too. Yeah, it's just the market is so different than it was 20 years ago, and we are all dealing with all the stressors of public life, and so I think as long as we all keep that in mind, we'll continue to do good work. So that was just a few little highlights. Now hopefully I've helped get us back on time. A little over time, not much. We're back on time.